Texas A&M falls victim to a disaster in Austin, Texas. So where do we go from here?
You are Locked On Aggies, your daily podcast on the Texas A&M Aggies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome in. I'm your host, Matt Galatzan, publisher of Texas A&M Aggies on SI. Welcome to Locked On Aggies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, now the number one sports podcast network. I am joined by Zach Dimmitt today. And Zach, the Aggies, they fell pretty hard in Austin this past weekend. The perfect season is ruined. Falling to the arch rival Longhorns is certainly less than ideal. Keeps you out of the SEC championship game. It was their first opportunity to get to Atlanta in quite some time. Probably their best chance that they've ever had. They can't come through. They can't make it to Atlanta. Still starving for that in terms of, an accomplishment. Getting to Atlanta is a huge deal in the SEC for a lot of these new teams. They've still been unable to do it in the past, 14 years now, and that's very disappointing. But there is still very, very much to play for this season. We're going to get into what went wrong in this game. We're going to break down the whole game for you. We're going to get into some potential playoff seeding and playoff matchup potential later in the show. But let's start with the game on Saturday, Zach. Things looked good in the first half. Texas A&M took a 10-3 lead into the locker room at halftime, but something changed in the second half. I'm not really sure what it was. Maybe Steve Sarkisian gave the greatest halftime speech of all time, but things just seemed to fall apart at the seams as soon as the third quarter started.
Yeah, I mean, both offenses kind of got out to a slow start. It was kind of a defensive battle there, and then A&M goes into the half leading, and you think it's only going to take one or two plays for the Aggies to maybe blow it open in the third quarter. And A&M the offense just kind of fell off the rails a little bit. And Texas, they took advantage. The offense for them hadn't been there. I believe the first touchdown was really, midway through the third quarter on a pass from Arch Manning, and from there, Longhorns kind of took over and they never looked back. And so, you have a lot of questions about what went wrong. It's kind of hard to really pinpoint it. Statistically, the two teams were pretty even for the most part, but I think the one thing that sticks out the most is Texas rushing for 218 yards. The Longhorns have not been a good rushing team at all this year. Actually, I said on the show last week leading into the game that I did not think it would be, a change of that trend for Texas against A&M. I thought that, the Longhorns would struggle once again on the ground. And it was the exact opposite of that. And so Quintravion Wisner, he's rushed for almost 400 yards against A&M the past 2 years now. And so that's definitely an issue that you look at as to why they lost. But unlike last year when A&M lost in Kyle Field, that was pretty crushing. It was the first game between the two teams in some time. Spot in the SEC championship game on the line between both of them. Spotted them in the CFP potentially for A&M if they had made to Atlanta. This year's loss is a lot different, obviously, because last year was really, really crushing for all those reasons, and it's still very disappointing this year. But I don't know if crushing is the right word for this year's loss to Texas, because I know people have been comparing A&M to maybe Ohio State of last year, losing their rivalry game, potentially going on to win a national title. We still have a long way to go to see if that can happen, but everything's in front of A&M right now. They have a monkey off their back, in terms of they already have a loss. So, okay, we don't have to have any pressure of going undefeated the entire way. They already have a loss under their shoulders. Now let's just go play. And so we'll see if it benefits A&M. I think it can. And this loss actually could benefit them in the bracket, which we'll get to later in the show. And so they could actually have a pretty nice path to make a deep run. But we just gotta wait and see what happens. There's a lot of football left.
Yeah, and I you mentioned the Trey Wisner 200 and the Longhorns rushing for 218 yards. I think he had 155 himself. 391, I think, is the math for that guy over the last couple of years against Texas A&M. But there was a couple of other issues, too, that we'll get into in the second segment. In terms of what this loss means, I get I really want to beat Texas. It's our arch rival. It's our biggest game of the year. We got to beat we got to beat TU. We got to do this. We got to do that. I get the pride aspect of that. But if everybody can just take a step back and look at it from a macro lens, it really doesn't mean anything. Like, yes, you missed out on the SEC championship game, and that sucks. And that would have been really nice to win an SEC title, kind of put the cherry on top of one of the best regular seasons in school history. At the end of the day, I don't think it really matters at all. There's still an opportunity for you to get a first-round bye, potentially. Maybe you drop to number 4. I mean, I tend to believe that you should probably stay at Texas Tech because the Texas Tech loss to Arizona State is much worse than a loss to Texas on the road. I think that if you do get a bye, things could set up nicely for you to see who you get in the second round. But even if you don't, if you're the number 5 seed, certainly you get the group of 5 team, and we'll get into that in the third segment, but there's still so much to go on here. It's not the most deflating thing in the entire world. And yeah, you got to figure out a way to beat the guys in Austin. That obviously has to be a critical part of what you're angling towards going forward throughout the rest of throughout Mike Elko's tenure. He's got to figure out how to beat Steve Sarkisian. He's lost 2. That doesn't mean he's going to lose 3 or 4 or 5 or 6. It's just 2 games. Texas just played a better football game. Texas won both lines of scrimmage, which was very surprising to us, I believe. Arch Manning kind of outdueled Marcel Reed. He wasn't great in the first half. Marcel Reed was pretty good in the first half. Manning was better in the second half. Marcel Reed threw a couple picks in the second half. He wasn't really the same in the second half. So it's kind of an up and down battle. Manning just got the better of him in this particular day. There was a lot of different things there, and again, we'll get into that later, but I'd encourage everybody to take a step back, take a deep breath. You'll get him again next year in College Station. You'll get another shot at him. You'll get to shut him up then. For now, there's still so much to play for and so much to be happy about this season. I mean, after all of the 8-4 and 7-5s and 6-6s and hell, 5-7 under Jimbo Fisher, this program is so obviously on the right track that losing one game to your arch rival doesn't necessarily mean the end of the world. And I hope everybody can kind of come to see it that way. But we're going to change gears here in a second, and we're going to tell you exactly what went wrong on Saturday or on Friday night, and kind of diagnose what happened on the lines of scrimmage and elsewhere. So stick with us after this break, and we'll be right back. The World Cup is coming back to North America for the first time since 1994, and with 48 teams for the first time ever, it's going to be massive. But let's be honest, getting tickets is usually the hardest part. That's why the Game Time app is clutch, finally giving fans a real advantage when it comes to snagging seats. With Game Time, you can track price drops in real time, get alerts when great seats open, and buy tickets the moment they hit the app. It puts the power back in your hands and makes going to the World Cup realistic instead of impossible. You pull up the app, and the layout makes it so simple to scroll through matchups and compare seat views. You can pick a game, tap a section, and have your tickets locked in with minutes. No confusion, no hunting for the fine print. So take the guesswork out of buying World Cup tickets in every match, concert, or event with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, download the app, make an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Swipe, tap, ticket, go. Download the Game Time app today. All right, so what went wrong in Austin on Saturday night? You could point to the 218 yards rushing by Texas, and we'll get into that a little bit here because that is completely out of character for the Longhorns this season. They haven't been able to run against anybody except Oklahoma, apparently, which was even more bizarre. They've really had two good rushing games this season. One of them was against Oklahoma. One of them was against Texas A&M, both by Trey Wisner. Go figure. I think where this game was lost, personally, for Texas A&M was on the line of scrimmage, which is extremely out of character for this football team. They had been dominant up front all year long against Notre Dame. Whoever they played in the SEC, they dominated the line of scrimmage on both sides of the ball pretty much the entire year. And this is the first time they've gotten whipped. The Texas defensive line was very good against an A&M offensive line that I still think is the best in the country. I mean, maybe you can make an argument for Ohio State or a couple of other teams here and there, but A&M has a really good argument for that. Texas whooped them up front. On the other side of the ball, they really didn't get a whole lot of pressure on Arch Manning in the second half. The first half, they did a pretty good job. They were able to rush him, get him off his spot, create some chaos and some dirty pockets. And he ended the first half 5 of 21. And everybody was like, "Oh, this is the Arch Manning we expected to see." He's been playing well the last couple of weeks, but this is the real Arch Manning. And then in the second half, Texas kind of figured it out, and they kind of bullied A&M up front. Cassius Howell wasn't a factor in this football game whatsoever. And when your best defensive player isn't a factor, and then your second best defensive player, Torian York, isn't really a factor, that's a recipe for disaster.
Yeah, the line of scrimmage, that's a pretty easy one when you look at it, and I totally agree with you. It's very obvious, what made the difference there, and it was very surprising because we talked about leading into the game that Texas's front seven is very talented. There was no secret about that. But what I was surprised about was the timing that Arch Manning got, as you mentioned. I mean, you and I were covering this game in Austin for Aggies on SI, and I remember a few times when he's standing in the pocket, it felt like he was there forever. A few of those turned into scrambles in the first half, and he had some success with his legs. I believe Manning ran for like a season high rushing total, and so it was a little bit surprising to see some of the timing that he was getting. Because Texas's offensive line has been wildly inconsistent this year. They've had a few decent performances later in the season, but overall, it has not been a consistent product. And so it was a little bit surprising to see that. For me, though, I was surprised at A&M being unable to expose the secondary in Texas more than I expected, because Texas's secondary, I don't have the numbers pulled up right now, but they're bottom half SEC in passing yards allowed. It hasn't been consistent in the back end this year. I mean, Georgia really had their way against Texas, multiple times. Former Aggies receiver Noah Thomas had his way against the Longhorns. So I was a little bit surprised that Concepcion and Mario Craver didn't have a big game. Concepcion, he had a few big plays here and there that, he scored in the touchdown, obviously, in the first half, had a few nice, that one punt return almost went to the house. But I was surprised that, credit to Texas. The secondary stepped up, and it was one of their weaknesses. They probably heard about that, and they stepped up to the occasion. But I was surprised that A&M was able to expose that part more. The two things that really stick out to me, though, is the 2 4th and 1s in the second half, both penalties on those 4th and 1s. Let's see, the first 4th and 1 is at the let me pull this up here. Is at the Texas, or is at the 50-yard line, and A&M gets a false start. If you keep that drive going, who knows what happens. You're down 13-10 at that point. You punt. Next drive, Texas scores, goes up 20-10. Next possession, okay, you're down 20-10 at the beginning of the fourth quarter. All right. 4th and 1 at the A&M 38-yard line. Now, this one, Mike Elko, I believe he said after the game that they did not intentionally take a delay a game on this 4th and 1 at their own 38-yard line. That cannot happen. And yeah, it's a bold move to go for it at your own 38, but it's 1 yard. You have the confidence you can get that yard. And
Mm-hmm.
that's where the game was lost in the second half, in my opinion, on those two plays, because those drives, you turn those into points, we're talking about a whole different game. And we saw A&M cut into the lead, EJ Smith running into the end zone, and it was like, oh man, A&M's they're going to be able to come back into this one, and Texas responded. Credit to them. But that's kind of where the game was lost in those 2 4th-and-1s, in my opinion, because if you continue those drives, even with just a few field goals, it's a whole different game. And so you have a false start and you have a delay a game on 2 4th-and-1s. That cannot happen, especially in the playoff. And maybe it's a good thing that it happens out of all times here when your season's not on the line, so that we can learn from it, and hopefully it doesn't come back to bite A&M, because they're going to be able to watch film and learn from those moments in the future.
Yeah, those 2 penalties were absolutely massive. And that's the second year in a row that Texas A&M has had issues on 4th down against Texas too. They were 0 for 3 against Texas in 2024, especially in that goal line play was especially big. Ethan Burke made that stop. That kept the game at 17-7, I believe, and really sealed it for the Longhorns. And then this year you got the 2 penalties, and that's just that hasn't been Texas A&M football this year. They've been good on 4th down. They haven't had a lot of penalties. It feels like the crowd got to him a little bit, because I'll be honest, I've been to DKR a few times in my life. That was as loud as I've ever heard it.
Yep.
In 38 years. I mean, I used to go to Texas A&M almost every time it was there growing up. I've been to a few other games there covering for work. That's the loudest I've ever heard it. That was an SEC that was an SEC stadium on Friday night, and maybe that got to him a little bit. The confidence has been there that they can come back, and that I've called them unkillable this year. I was wrong. That's fine. They did enough things wrong in this game that it got them beat. The penalties, the two interceptions by Marcel Reed at the end were killer. He can probably kiss the Heisman goodbye, which is fine. He doesn't care. You shouldn't care either. It's a nice trophy. It's politics, and it's frankly BS. He'll get some recognition. Maybe he'll still get invited, but it is what it is. The blocked field goal was a huge momentum shift.
Big. Yep.
Huge momentum shift. Like I mentioned, the turnovers, the 4th downs, Texas being able to run the ball down A&M's throat, which has been the Achilles heel of the Texas A&M defense all year long, and we've talked about it all year long. This is the first time it really came to bite them, because they couldn't stop Texas when it mattered. And it allowed Texas to keep control of the football game, particularly in the 4th quarter. And you mix all those things together, and you talk about the fact that Cassius Howell can't get involved in the football game whatsoever. He's kind of getting bullied, as a matter of fact. There's a viral clip that went around of him getting absolutely bullied up front by DJ Campbell, I believe it was. Mm-hmm. Torian York can't really get involved in the game, especially in the second half. There was breaks and coverages. It was it was the most out of character game I've seen Texas A&M play all year long. This is the first time they've looked like a deer in headlights all year long. And it really was just the last 2 quarters. They looked to be pretty much in control of the game in the first half, and then the second half came along and it completely evaporated. And it's really disappointing. There's no 2 ways around it. I know every Aggie fan out there wanted to have that game in their back pocket and be able to have the bragging rights over the Longhorns in the office that they're, or their friends or their family, or, just because you don't like them. But the fact of the matter is, you're going to the playoff, and they probably aren't. So you still got bragging rights. Just got to figure out how to beat them next year. And I think that the way that Texas A&M has, really taken a step from last year to this year, to think about what they can do from this year to next year with a lot of returners, probably, they're going to be okay. And like I said, playoffs, right? Let's examine what the playoffs could look like for Texas A&M in this segment coming up next. The holidays always feel a little easier when you already know the perfect gift. And Omaha Steaks makes it almost too simple. Whether you're treating yourself this season or sending something memorable to family and friends, Omaha Steaks delivers handcrafted perfection right to their door. And this week is the best time to jump in because the cyber sale is here and the deals are huge. I've given Omaha Steaks as a gift before, and the reaction is always the same. Excitement when the box arrives, even bigger smiles when everything hits the grill. Save big on unforgettable gifts with Omaha Steaks. Visit omahasteaks.com for 50% off site-wide and an extra 20% off of select favorites during their cyber sale. And for an additional $35 off, use promo code COLLEGE at checkout. That's omahasteaks.com, promo code COLLEGE. Terms apply. See site for details. All right, Zachary. Playoffs. Texas A&M is still going to be in very good position heading into this thing. Perhaps more favorable position than they would have with going to Atlanta, potentially losing there. Would you like to finish with an undefeated season and beating the Texas Longhorns going to the SEC championship? Absolutely, and nobody's saying you didn't. But things could still work out okay. So let's take a look at what the potential matchups could be for Texas A&M. The rankings don't come out until tomorrow, I believe, correct? It's either,
yes.
Yeah, I believe it's Tuesday. But there's a lot of different possibilities here. We feel like we know what most of the bracket's going to be, barring a massive surprise, right? That surprise being probably the Texas Longhorns jumping up from 16 to 10. That's the only way they can make it. Seems like a really, really unlikely scenario.
Yeah, ESPN, last I checked, has Texas at 2% chance to make the playoffs. So, yes, Texas just got their biggest win of the year, maybe the biggest win of the year in college football, and yet they're still not probably going to get in the playoffs. And so A&M fans should feel disappointed with the loss, but still feel pretty comfortable that, okay, at least our rivals didn't sneak in because of beating us. So just take that for what it is.
Yeah. So let's look at some of the possibilities here. Right now, the majority of projections have Texas A&M falling somewhere between 4 to 6. They have Virginia winning the ACC, coming in at number 11. Alabama sneaking in at number 10 after surviving the Iron Bowl. Notre Dame at 9, Oklahoma at 8, Ole Miss at 7, Tulane being the group of 5 at 12. And your top 4 being Ohio State, Indiana, Texas Tech, and Georgia. You could flip-flop Texas Tech and Texas A&M. You could flip-flop Oregon and Texas A&M. I don't see them falling any further than 6th. That seems about right. I don't really pay much attention to the AP poll. I don't anymore since the college football playoff rankings came out because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter. I don't know what the AP poll even has them ranked at right now. That's how little.
6.
Is it 6? That's
I
perfect.
So.
That's where it should be. So in that scenario, you could face an ACC team in Virginia at number 11 hosting a home playoff game at Kyle Field. That seems like a winner to me, Zach.
Yeah, I mean, listen, even if somehow Duke ends up beating Virginia and potentially knocking the ACC out of the bracket altogether, because it's the 4 highest ranked conference champions. So that means James Madison, North Texas, Tulane, you could be looking at 2 group of 5s at 11 or 12 if Duke wins against Virginia. So I'm sorry, A&M is going to absolutely – I mean, North Texas and Tulane, they've had solid seasons. James Madison as well. A&M will handle any of those teams. They'll handle Virginia as well if they play them. And Virginia's a solid team. But it's looking really nice if you can fall into that 6 or 5 spot. Based on this projection, if everything plays out the way we think, and let's say Tech stays at 4, you would maybe like to be the 5 seed going to Lubbock and having quite a bit of A&M faithful follow you. That's a long drive. Don't get me wrong. It's like an 8-hour drive. But that's,
still in Texas.
Yeah, it's still in Texas. And you'll have a lot of fans at Jones AT&T Stadium for that one. Man, that would be an amazing environment. Would you rather face Georgia or Tech? I would rather face Tech if I'm A&M, to be honest with you.
Oh,
So
100%.
it's everything's going to be just fine for the Aggies, in my opinion. I think there's a great chance they can make it to the semis. You never know who they're going to face once they get to that point. But I think if it lines up and kind of plays chalk the way that it looks right here, man, that's a great place to be in. I mean, last year Texas lost the SEC championship to Georgia, and they got the 5 seed, which is arguably the most favorable seed you can get. They faced 3-loss Clemson at home. Then they faced Arizona State. That was a battle, but Arizona State was I believe they were the 4 seed. And so that was kind of a favorable path for Texas. They made it all the way to semis, almost beat Ohio State, if not for a few big plays there. Same thing can happen to A&M if they get a favorable path. So I think it lines up really well for the Aggies.
Yeah, I mean, let's say these things hold chalk. Texas A&M versus Tulane. Ole Miss already beat Tulane. What was it, 45-10 earlier this year? And Tulane just lost their coach. Whether or not he'll be coaching in the college football playoff, I don't know. I don't cover Tulane. I assume that he will. It's not exactly the same thing as Ole Miss hanging around with Lane Kiffin after he's already jetted for Baton Rouge. Then you get an awesome matchup versus Texas Tech in the second round. If this projection that we have on screen, Texas A&M at 5, Tulane at 12, Texas Tech at 4, Ohio State at 1. I mean, I would book Texas A&M all the way to the semis in a heartbeat.
At the least.
At the least. And I think Texas A&M can beat Ohio State. They're good enough. They're explosive enough. Would they be favored? Probably not. Would I bet on them to win? Probably not. But they've got a damn good shot. They got a really damn good shot. So I like that spot better. The only other spot I could think of that would be better would be if they fell to the 7 seed and, they had Indiana in round 2 because I think Indiana's a fraud. But then you'd still be matched up against Alabama or Notre Dame in that spot, and that's a tougher matchup by far. So let's hope and pray for the 5 seed for Texas A&M. That gives them an unbelievable path. Hosting a home playoff game in College Station would be so much fun. That environment would be unreal. Then you go to round 2, potentially play Texas Tech, unreal environment, wherever that is. So, unbelievable. So, there's still so much, like I said, still so much to play for. A lot of intriguing matchups. The college football playoff rankings come out tomorrow. We'll break those down probably on Wednesday's show, I would imagine. But we'll be back tomorrow to break down more of this Texas loss and where the Aggies can go from here and recover and what maybe some changes that they need to make and those kinds of things. But that's going to do it for another episode of Locked On Aggies. Thank you so much for making Locked On Aggies your first listen today. For your second listen, check out Locked On SEC. Chris Gordy breaks down the best conference in college sports, from the rivalries to the championship and every game in between. Find Locked On SEC on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcasts. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Don't forget to like the video, subscribe to our channel, subscribe to our podcast, download our podcast. We're on every major podcast platform. Follow us on X at Locked On Aggies. Follow me on X at Matt Galatzan. Follow Zach on X at Zach Dimmitt 7. And follow us on Texas A&M Aggies on SI, where Zach does some pretty kick-ass work for us over there. And we'll see you next time.